2025 was an insane year for television, so much to the point that covering everything was futile. So with a daring sense of wanting to take on a challenge, I'm setting out to rank every popular season of television that was released this year. I set a limit at 40 shows, which is still an absolutely insane amount of television to consume, since at some point there has to be a line between high and mid popularity. This may also be tragic for some viewers, but I'm not going to include YA romance shows. I know, this is really sad, but I'm Team Conrad all the way. The vast majority of this video won't include spoilers, so relax, grab a snack, and let's go through this year's most popular good and bad shows, since we'll be starting at the bottom. Ironheart.
Hey yo, get off the street!
The fundamental premise of Ironheart is straight up botched. Riri Williams, a Tony Stark level prodigy, is having money problems and gets expelled from school for plagiarism. Instead of making money in a multitude of realistic and practical ways given her immense intelligence, or pulling any connection she has with Wakanda, she resorts to joining a criminal gang for money. From there, she borderline becomes a villain in which she steals millions, directly kills someone, indirectly lands someone in jail from her actions, and spoilers if you really care, skip forward like 5 seconds, she makes a literal deal with the devil. And there's also other complex shitty things she does to people. Then, the show has the gall to dive into the morality of her character and ask us if she's actually a bad person. To which I'd say, yeah, she definitely is. This also isn't bringing into account that she's very smug and arrogant, which further decreases her likability. So, with that monumental problem where your lead character is basically narrative poison, it's impossible for me to connect with anything the show has to offer, which is scant little to begin with anyways. This is supposed to be a dramatic show, but it feels like a jarring comedy most of the time, where none of the humor works and every plot beat is overflowing with stupidity. Then to quickly run through some cataclysmic issues, none of the dialogue has any nuance, most of the side characters feel like caricatures, the villain is blander than an unsalted cracker, and everything about the story lacks any tension or is remotely surprising. An all-around unmitigated failure, and there's not a single thing about the show I actually liked. Love, Death, and Robots Season 4. It's devastating how far the show has fallen. I was obsessed with Season 1 because it had so many bangers and I loved the violence and maturity of its animated shorts. Something truly unique and refreshing coming from Netflix of all places. Seasons 2 and 3 weren't as good, and Season 4 unfortunately goes even further into the grave. Of the 10 episodes, 1 is a music video, 2 are silly gimmicks that don't do anything for me, another is a live action that's so underdeveloped that it barely registered that I watched anything of substance, 1 is a Secret Life of Pets but edgier, and the rest all have their own issues. Generally revolving around writing, because telling an efficient, compelling short story in 10 to 15 minutes is extremely difficult, especially for shorts that contain a lot of action. For being able to do any mature story at your disposal, the possibilities are endless, and the selection we have is underwhelming to an overwhelming degree. The only short of the season I partially enjoyed was the Germans unleashing this Lovecraftian threat that massacres this plane of soldiers, and even that isn't close to the best of what this series used to offer. Yellow Jackets Season 3. I'm sorry if you're a big Yellow Jackets fan, but the latest season broke me, and if you haven't heard of it, it's basically like Society of Snow meets Lost, or just a more YA version of Lost. The first season had me pretty engaged. It was mysterious, and also had a daring plot structure where the survivors after the crash have their own plotline in the future. However, Season 3 just... where do I even begin? Every character is wholly insufferable, everyone feels like an antagonist, the plot is nonsensical and farcical most of the time, Season 2 ends on a really big and devastating note, and Season 3 full-on time jumps past it, leaping over a major point of conflict that lands Season 3 into an area that wasn't interesting from a conflict perspective. Then one thing that constantly tilts me is the writers borderline gaslighting us with the fantastical elements of the story, since some crazy shit happens in Season 1, but they have the characters still acting skeptical towards anything weird going on. Even in the present timeline, the characters devolve into being insane villains. When Misty, a borderline psychopath, is the most protagonist-adjacent character, then the show is just cooked. Not to mention that the plot lost any ounce of intrigue that it once had earlier on, and it feels like so many characters have plot armor. It's pretty remarkable how much this show has dropped off for me, and I had quite the terrible experience where these were hour-long episodes where somehow it even felt like barely anything was happening. Marvel Zombies. This was better than I expected, even though it's still very low in my ranking. The main highlight in this series is the amount of creativity from the creators. There's a lot of cool ideas, like spoilers if you really care about Marvel Zombies spoilers. There's Infinity Hulk, giant pin particle infused zombies, Blade Moon Knight, and a plethora of other interesting zombie interactions. The main downfall, however, is obviously the writing. All the characters are flat and uninteresting, the story is purely driven by the plot, and 90% of the plot is basically just your typical Marvel humor. It's such a weird tonal whiplash because the gore and blood is outstanding and Marvel is finally appealing to an older demographic, but then that's jarringly juxtaposed with the cringiest dialogue possible. If they actually tried writing a tangible and more mature story, and not something that feels like a bunch of nerds throwing around cool ideas and then having no idea how to meaningfully write it, then this could have been a good miniseries. The Witcher Season 4. Honestly, didn't hate my time watching this season as I went in expecting an atrocity and came out marginally enjoying some aspects, which this isn't to excuse the plethora of horrendous deviations from the source material and baffling moments of writing. Geralt, Yennefer, and Ciri are all split up and their plotlines vary wildly in quality. Ciri hanging out with the rats is never engaging, and the only good thing about the subplot is Charlton Copley as the villain Leo Bonhart. Feels like he's a part of a different show because whenever he's on screen, the quality astronomically skyrockets.
Good morning, my little mate. Finally. Did you just... Stop that.
Yennefer assembles a bunch of sorceresses to fight Vilgefort, and they have fuck-all characterization between all of them, but at least some moments of action were exciting during its climax. Then we have Liam Hemsworth as Geralt, and he was fine, mostly missing Henry Cavill's natural charisma. His plotline this season is traveling to Nilfgaard, and along the way he picks up companions. Regis is the only character in this ensemble that is anywhere close to being interesting. Everyone else is kind of just there. Then, outside of the moments where barely anything happens, like the episode where everyone takes a turn giving their backstory, which contains a musical number from Jaskier,
no.
there are some fun encounters. Like they have an Avatar: The Last Airbender swamp episode, there's a solid witch trial scene, and the final battle at the bridge was pretty hype. The show may have bad writers, but whoever is in charge of the action is undeniably great at their job, along with it being a major improvement over Season 3. Season 4, though, is proof that the best aspects come directly from the books, and reinforces that the show would obviously be much better if it was a faithful adaptation. The Paper Season 1. The Office spinoff covering a failing newspaper outlet with a carryover character in Oscar Martinez. I was marginally interested in this given that Domhnall Gleeson was attached, but it was unfortunately very rough. The biggest sore point here is Esmeralda, the most unlikable character with practically no redeemable characteristics. The frustrating aspect with her is that I think her character would operate much better as being the duality to ethical journalism and not an antagonistic saboteur. Only a single writer utilizes her as a partial protagonist out of the 10 episodes, and that was the only time this character clicked for me. Another sore point is a lot of characters feel like rehashes from The Office. Like we basically have Jim and Pam again. There's coincidentally 3 accountants where one's a bit slow, one's a sassy lady, and the other is just Oscar. And we also even have a geriatric version of Stanley. Not a lot of creativity to this cast, whereas in Parks and Rec as an example, everyone is original and iconic. Then for one final big flaw, the writers write almost every character as if they have half the IQ they should have. The Office worked because you could relate to and sympathize with most of the characters. They actually felt moderately normal, while in the paper, when Oscar is one of the few consistently sane characters, that's a problem. How can the audience connect with anyone when they're all utterly incompetent for the sake of comedy? This also stems into an inconsistent portrayal of characters where, in some scenes, they seem smart and normal, and then in others, they come across as blithering idiots. Now, I am being very negative here, however, like The Office and Parks and Rec, this show is salvageable. There were some strong funny moments throughout the season, Ned and Mare have great chemistry, albeit their romance is extremely telegraphed, and the general premise of pursuing stories out in the wild lends to a sense of fun variety. I'm willing to give this show a second chance and hope they improve in the next season. Gen V Season 2. To establish some context for this season, there was a tragic circumstance where Chance Perdomo, who played Andre, passed away before filming, so instead of recasting, the creators went with the option of killing his character off-screen. This ends up being pretty detrimental for the first half of the season because the creators bail on the direction they took at the end of season 1, and they revert the status quo immediately to being back to normal. Even to a degree that doesn't make sense, like these characters clearly being rebel adjacent, but they're being brought back to school anyways. Also, since Andre dies off screen, this relegates the narrative into telling the audience what happened instead of showing them. We're told about this climactic and integral part of the story, but since this is entirely skipped over, how are we supposed to feel its impact and sympathize with the characters? Then past this, one thing that really bugs me is that most of the main characters are pretty dull. The only protagonist I find enjoyable is Emma, and the main thing that partially redeems this season is Cypher. Hamish Linklater puts the show on his back, and every scene he's in, the quality immediately pivots. However, a plethora of other issues tip the scale back down, like the plot is very similar to season 1, the finale is incredibly messy and baffling, any points of romance barely have any time to breathe so they feel rushed and jarring, the teenage or I should say adult drama aspects are mediocre, the shock value just feels gross, over the top and forced now, and there's a handful of plot conveniences and contrivances that would take way too long to get into. But a couple highlights are Marie's power levels fluctuating drastically from scene to scene, and apparently out of this entire school that even has speedsters present, Jordan and Marie are somehow the only notable strong heroes. I'm interested to see how The Boys Season 5 plays out, but I'm not as ravenous towards this franchise anymore. Wednesday Season 2. Wednesday Addams goes to a school for outcasts and generally has to solve some kind of deadly mystery. So, Wednesday as a show can be fun at times, and there are some distinct pieces that work really well, like Fred Armisen as Uncle Fester, and there are some individual episode premises that go in fun directions. But outside of those pieces, most of Wednesday's narrative is spent on unraveling a greater mystery, and the issue in this regard is that the mystery isn't engaging or interesting at all. The first 4 episodes particularly of season 2 are very weak because of this, as trying to find this Raven killer was flat out boring. Not to mention a lot of other issues that stack on this, like most dialogue scenes being laden with exposition, the plot is watered down by a bunch of mediocre subplots, so the titular character isn't really present that often, leaving us with characters that aren't good enough to be leading scenes. Wednesday doesn't have a lot of character growth, and oddly I found Thing, the Hand, to be the most interesting character, which is ironically not a joke. And then, as someone who generally makes devoid of logic videos, this season definitely falls into some dumb plot points. Tonally, the show is silly, but this is also an issue in that it feels even sillier than the first season, where there, it felt unique in the sense that it was dark yet playful, while season 2 loses a lot of seriousness and pivots much more into comedic territory, and that's even expressed in other ways, like music and cinematography. This tonal shift can work, but since the show lacks creativity in writing, it rarely makes good usage of its weird and quirky world to truly make the show pop. I may not squarely be placed into the demographic that would devour a show like Wednesday, but I think season 2 has too many mediocre aspects for me to enjoy it, even on a guilty pleasure level. Alien Earth Season 1. Simple premise: a ship carrying alien specimens crashes into Earth, so chaos ensues. If you follow my channel, you may be surprised that this isn't on the bottom because I made a 40-minute devoid of logic video on it, but there are at the very least some redeemable aspects for the overall package. That includes the stellar acting, there being some isolated good scenes, a strong 5th episode that operates as its own mini alien movie, outstanding production value, and I honestly like the pace and edit of the show. I know some people dropped it out of boredom, but I just felt very captivated and engaged throughout. Noah Hawley sets a really good and ominous tone, and it's a shame that the writing couldn't sustain all of these good aspects. Joe has 5 instances in which he should have died in the first 3 episodes alone. Characters operate without basic common sense so that the story could fundamentally function. There are baffling directions Noah Hawley takes the story. The hybrids are extremely underdeveloped, especially Wendy, who has the most abrupt and jarring arc, not to mention her being extremely overpowered, and she acquires new skills like picking up pieces of candy. And I didn't talk about this in my devoid of logic video, but the incessant and constant comparisons to Peter Pan were really annoying. I don't know why Noah Hawley woke up one day and was like, I really need to make Peter Pan but in the alien world, and it just made his writing feel even worse by being so blatant and on the nose. Dave the Eye Octopus wasn't enough to save the show, and you especially know it's bad when most of the fandom is acting like the show isn't canon already. Mobland Season 1. A British gang crime drama starring Tom Hardy as a fixer who tries to stop a gang war from starting. For me personally, I'm not a big fan of the gangster genre, with some obvious exceptions though. It's generally hard to connect with the story as your ability to empathize with these subjects is difficult because everyone is essentially a villain, especially for Mobland. Even Tom Hardy, the lead, is a bad guy. The only way to be invested in what he's doing is because he's trying to stop a catastrophe, and even past that, the antagonist feels more vindicated because he's not the aggressor. So I just don't have much investment in these characters, nor do I care what happens to them, despite the amount of screen time we spend with some of them, creating an external disconnect for me as a viewer. Then another big thing that taints my enjoyment of this genre is that the plot generally doesn't have a lot of unique directions to go, and there's not a lot of variety between these types of stories. Without its surprisingly stacked cast, the show would basically be nothing, and they really are hard carrying. Like, the main selling point here is Tom Hardy. He's fun to watch on screen mostly because he's a great actor, but everything outside of his perspective bogs down the narrative to a significant degree. Anytime there's any forward momentum, it's immediately halted by something else. Because of this, the drama seems to be the focal point, and it isn't that compelling to me. Some characters also do outrageously stupid and random things, creating artificiality around big points of conflict when Tom Hardy needs to inevitably fix what happens. Guy Ritchie also serves as a director for some episodes, which may seem exciting, but ever since Aladdin, I feel like he's mostly lost his creative spark. Squid Game Season 3. I probably would have covered the show when it came out, but I was away, so hey, I'm only like half a year late. While Season 2 was a moderate rehash to an invigorating Season 1, Season 3 is even more of a step down. Primarily because most of the unique good aspects about Season 2 are no longer present in Season 3. Frontman is back to being behind the scenes, we're left with the remaining games but stretched out over 6 episodes. The subplot with the cop is still excruciatingly boring because we know the endpoint from a mile away, and a lot of the more interesting characters died off last season, leaving only a couple good characters, and by the end, there was honestly no one left that I was remotely invested in emotionally. Remember in Season 1 where the later episodes were so tragic and heartbreaking? Yeah, Season 3 doesn't really come close to that besides maybe like one moment. Narratively, the only thing I found kind of neat is that the main character has an isolated character arc in Season 3, despite this being the second part of the story. But everything involving the baby just got too absurd and silly. At a baseline, I guess you can derive some enjoyment out of the games themselves. The show isn't actively boring outside of the detective plot, it's just disappointing at times and very underwhelming when it comes to the ending. Stranger Things Season 5. Oh boy, this has been a very divisive ride, and I've mostly landed on the negative side. Which shouldn't be a surprise if you follow my channel, because Season 5 breaks practically every rule of writing, and that's not an exaggeration. Plot holes, plot armor, contrivances, conveniences, you name it, it applies.
Monsters aren't real, Holly.
I don't believe you.
You basically have to operate within a mindset to ignore all of this to appreciate the season. And getting past that tsunami of issues, the season does have some fun set pieces. It very much is the Marvelization of Stranger Things. Nevertheless, there were still some exclusive issues within Season 5 that drove me crazy, like the biggest one being the insane character bloat in scenes. It felt like the Duffer Brothers were playing spin the bottle for who got the current line of dialogue, they massively overused certain plot devices, every new piece of information makes the overall continuity more confusing, and one last example is the status quo underwhelmingly getting reverted. I would have put Season 5 much lower in my ranking if it wasn't for the shockingly great epilogue. It genuinely got me and was extremely touching. I'm glad that the Duffer Brothers clutched up and didn't ruin the very ending, and even the writing felt like a major step up in comparison to everything prior. Still though, a devoid of logic is definitely on the horizon, and it'll take a very long time to make, so bear with me. The Last of Us Season 2. This may be surprisingly high all things considered, and the main reason it is up here is that the entire season isn't bad. Episodes 2 and 6 are still genuinely great episodes that are oddly well adapted in an overall season that's terribly adapted. Craig Mazin completely misses the overall point of the second game that's heavily entrenched in pain and revenge. The show primarily substitutes all of that hurt and anguish with romance, taking away that crucial throughline the game had with multiple puzzling changes. Which this isn't the only major sore point, because Ellie was borderline butchered as a character. I had to make a 23-minute long video about this, and to summarize, Ellie is drastically dumbed down, her maturity is lessened, making her seem like she's still a child, her lethality is nerfed, and Craig also makes Ellie seem more like a psychopath in certain pivotal scenes. Really, the main way to enjoy the show is if you're completely detached from that source material. If you don't have that basis of comparison of how strongly compelling the game is, then it doesn't sting as badly while watching the show's versions of events. Dina, at the very least though, is much better in the show thanks to Isabella Merced, and she oddly steals most of Ellie's thunder, which again, I find funny. But the things that should sour everyone's enjoyment is definitely the poor pace of the season and its episode count. Silo Season 2. A dystopian post-apocalyptic show about a society who lives in a silo. Season 1 was very exciting, the plot felt electric, the tension was palpable throughout, and the main character had a riveting drive. Going into Season 2, I was pretty hyped, and I was met with a brick wall of disappointment. The main character is relegated to a plot that's devoid of anything interesting and is chock full of side quests and filler. I don't know what the hell happened to the writer's room or if the second book isn't as good, but the overall pace of the season is drawn out so much. Like, I'm generally someone who is forgiving of shows that are slower, and I just hit my limit here, man. Every single character has to be a POV character, so it's like everyone gets an inch of development, but when you add them all up, that counts as a full episode. And then at the end, when you recall the plot, you can summarize what happened in less than 10 seconds for the whole episode. This is a very gutting review so far, but there are some nice moments peppered throughout the season. Ser Jorah has a nice monologue, there's good acting, I love the production design and seamless usage of VFX, and the last couple episodes finally get the ball rolling to a satisfying degree, but the damage of how much this season was dragged out really tanked my enjoyment overall. Sirens. I went into this thinking it would mostly be an annoying show about rich people being insufferable, and thankfully it wasn't just that. It's mainly about this lady abruptly showing up to this rich compound to snap her sister out of being this assistant for this insanely rich family, primarily because their dad has dementia. At first, this place seems like a weird cult from our perspective, and because of that, the first half of the show was a bit intriguing and tense. Was the sister under some kind of intoxicating relationship? Was she influenced by the wealth and atmosphere? How much has she changed? Is Julianne Moore's character actually devious? There's a lot of complexity and mystery in the air, and unfortunately, most of this evaporates in the last couple of episodes as it devolves into an over-the-top melodrama with some annoying cliches, along with an ending that genuinely made me want to vomit. However, the show is predominantly carried by its actors. Millie Ayclock especially gives a phenomenal performance. Every scene with her sisters bursting with guttural emotions, and the general juxtaposition of her happy facade being met with the dirty reality of her past is very juicy, forcing uncomfortable yet necessary revelations. That's by far the best part of the show, to the point that other areas are much weaker in comparison, and the direction the story goes is a pretty big letdown. Peacemaker Season 2. For context for this placement, Season 1 of Peacemaker grew on me quite substantially. I went into the show not very interested in the subject matter, and Gunn creates a fun, complicated, and dysfunctional team of characters that all have unique dynamics. In essence, what James Gunn is good at. For Season 2, however, that main highlight is sorely missing. Besides one scene earlier on, they don't all get together for a big purpose until episode 6, creating a story that feels scattered and incohesive for everyone involved. Season 2 primarily focuses on Peacemaker's character, and there are great scenes involving him, but I don't feel the actual plot is as interesting as Season 1's, where that season had a lot of intrigue, stakes, and excitement. Season 2 is more of a what-if season with some fragmented subplots, along with the final episode being very anticlimactic and surprisingly extremely cheesy. The show also makes me really dislike James Gunn's dialogue. Some scenes have the weirdest and longest tangents where characters will randomly drone on about dumb shit, which isn't referring to Adrian since it fits his character, but more Langston and his bird blindness as an example. When James Gunn tries to force his humor, I think it regularly falls flat, and it normally flourishes through the great chemistry and dynamics of its quirky characters, which loops back to them all being separated. This leaves a season that is a very noticeable downgrade, and given the cliffhanger ending, maybe the direction for Season 3 could be more interesting. Daredevil Born Again Season 1. I feel like this show has aged rather poorly in my memory, especially after going back and looking at what the audience rated it on IMDb. Maybe I'm a bit more cynical than your average bloke because I preceded Born Again with going back to Season 3 of the base show, where that season was sublime. Born Again fundamentally loses a lot of those strengths. The integral supporting character trio is demolished and not replaced with anything remotely as good. Like, the opening of Foggy's death is just so unearned to the point that it genuinely made me laugh. And then Matt breaking his code due to this event completely lacks weight. You toss out seasons worth of struggle on this topic just to immediately jump to this major point for his character. It feels like cheap and lazy writing for what this major plot point deserves. This should be something that is built up to throughout the season and paid off later. Starting with such a compromised inciting incident that's also compounded by Karen piecing out because she wasn't originally in the story makes connecting to the show very difficult for me. Although at the same time, there are some good aspects. Wilson Fisk and Matt Murdock are always engaging, the corrupt cops angle and them eventually imitating the Punisher, and the vigilante court case were compelling plot threads. There are promising aspects present, besides Muse of course, to the point that a Season 2 will probably be able to vindicate most of the wrongs done by Season 1. Only Murders in the Building Season 5. A cozy fun show about a trio solving murders that happen in their building. I watched all 5 seasons just for this segment, and having done so, I think Season 5 is the weakest. Not by a large margin, and it's primarily because of the plot being the least interesting, and there were barely any suspects. Also, since this is a TV show murder mystery, the general structure of the story inherently makes the plot very predictable, primarily in the way of, since they have a lot of time to burn, anyone who is a suspect in the first 7 episodes, flat out probably won't be the killer. It's almost always the person who draws the least amount of attention, so when our characters pivot their focus to them later on, you start to get major revelations. This started creating a sensation where I was getting impatient and kind of bored with the show. Although this is the plot side and really the main draw is the trio. They're consistently funny.
God! Stop slut-shaming me!
And there are plenty of clever jokes to keep you entertained. Steve Martin and Martin Short are particularly stronger than Selena, which may be heresy to some people, and she more works as a juxtaposing younger character to the older weirdos. Additionally, for her character, I feel like Mabel has had barely any character growth and she's always hovering in the state of existential and identity crisis. Bit unfortunate considering that the other two have a lot more going on. Only Murders in the Building is more of a comfort show, which some people may love, but since a big focus is on the mystery and plot, sometimes just doesn't hit as good as prior seasons. American Primeval. A story about a mother trying to get through the chaotic West with her son, and along the way, she finds a reluctant and closed-off guide to help them. That's the main premise, and there are also 3 other subplots, all of which have nothing to do with the main plot, and this slows the overall pace to a crawl. Because of this, the miniseries comes off as what feels like was probably just a movie, and then Netflix wanted this to be turned into a miniseries. Pure speculation, but those are the vibes. Not all of this is bad, and I kind of like the ambitious and epic nature of this tale. It's just not cohesive at all, and some of the endings were pretty underwhelming and baffling, along with said subplots regularly dragging. The main plot is obviously the highlight, with 2 good characters in the mysterious guide and the mother. The son is meh, and the indigenous mute child feels like she's rarely ever acknowledged. And even though this is 6 episodes, it never feels like the depth between these characters gets to a satisfying, juicy level. I can think of multiple other westerns like this that achieve a much higher point of catharsis in a much shorter time. On the bright side though, Primeval's best aspect is definitely the production design, costume, and makeup. Everyone looks disgusting, which is refreshing. I'm tired of people in The Last of Us, as an example, looking pristine at all times, and the wear and tear actually being reflected in your characters is great. It both serves a narrative purpose while selling the gritty realism that the show is going for. The color correction also really pushes this feeling as well, and for me personally, I'm not a fan of the constant usage of shaky cam. Makes the show a bit too frustrating to watch, but that's personal preference. If you like these types of wide sprawling westerns in this era, and don't mind some flaws, then this will definitely be your jam. Nobody Wants This Season 2. I'll be brief with this one since I honestly didn't know about the show until seeing it was nominated for Best Comedy. It's an unlikely romance of a girl who can't find love, instantly clicking with a Jewish rabbi, and a lot of conflict ensues. In general, it's a sharp, witty, and lovable romantic comedy with 2 excellent leads in Kristen Bell and Adam Brody, who I really adore. Season 1 was like the honeymoon phase of this show. It was infectious, and then Season 2 comes along, and the writers mostly lost the plot, falling into annoying cliches, silly issues between characters that can be solved with the smallest ounce of transparency, and general trajectories for some characters that are very predictable. It's still a warm and cozy show, with Season 2 retaining the sharpness and humor and insane chemistry between leads. It's just an unfortunate step down in every other area. The White Lotus Season 3. The White Lotus as a whole is a special show where great actors get to come together like the Avengers in an intoxicating storm of a story. However, for Season 3, this is easily the weakest season. It genuinely made me feel like I was getting deja vu with how repetitious and drawn out it was. Some plotlines, like the father of the rich family as an example, stall out for such a long time as the characters barely change and mope around, or other characters are artificially inactive for whatever plot reason. This isn't to say that the entire season was bad, because there are some good moments mixed in. It's just by no means paced as well as it should be. Another thing I wasn't a fan of this season is that I simply didn't like the selection of characters. They weren't as deeply intriguing as they normally are, or felt generic and stereotypical. I was only drawn to a few of them, and this is also a bit more so because I love their respective actors. Which this all stems into the fact that The White Lotus has a strong quality baseline. Mike White is a methodical director, letting the actors deliver crucial points of development and information with subtle expressions, which in turn makes the acting pop and shine. It's not a mystery why this show keeps getting Best Acting noms. So even if the writing isn't up to par, then it can still be enjoyable to a degree. However, if this quality of writing continues and God forbid gets worse, then I don't know if I'll keep watching more of The White Lotus. Reacher Season 3. Jack Reacher is a charismatic, extremely smart, buff guy who takes down evil organizations. The movie's adaptation of this character was uber serious and gritty, while the show blends more humor into the mix, and as a result, it's lighter in tone and can be pretty funny at times.
I will ruin your life with one phone call.
I'll end your life with one phone.
Every season is self-contained, adapting one of the many novels in the series, and in this season, Reacher infiltrates a mysterious operation while undercover. Of the 3 seasons, this story has the best plot as it contains the most consistent tension. Trying to maintain your cover while improvising leads to some exciting scenes, and a pretty steady flow of wrenches being thrown at Reacher. There's particularly a Russian roulette scene that gets pretty insane. The supporting characters aren't as great as prior seasons, and there's specifically an out-of-place romance development, but this shortcoming is mostly traded out with a villain that's more fleshed out than usual. Now, for Reacher, this is enjoyable television, it just doesn't necessarily hit narrative high points, as is the case with the other seasons. It's just a good, enjoyable, consistent quality throughout, and you can specifically see this reflected through its IMDb scores, where it essentially averages an 8 through every episode. The main glue that really contributes to this quality and makes the show worthwhile is Alan Ritchson, who perfectly embodies Reacher. He exudes so much charisma, and without him, the show wouldn't work at all. Abbott Elementary Season 4. I'd label this as my go-to comfort show that's currently airing. Basically Parks and Rec style entertainment, but set in an elementary school setting. It's not as good as Parks and Rec, but it's still a wholesome and lovely time with obviously colorful characters. It's also specifically a step up from season 3 since the main character awkwardly detached from the main setting in that season, and now that she's properly back, the show returns to a comfortable stride, and as a whole, season 4 specifically may be the strongest. The crossover episode with Always Sunny was iconic.
Yeah, Industrial War, and that was a big one. There were, of course, lots of Marines and crazy vermin and aliens.
The background plot with the rich golf course introduces a deeper thematic level to the show, and certain characters have great development. Ava specifically has had a really cool journey over the seasons, slowly accruing more and more empathy, and this season sees her at her most responsible. Her entertaining a real, healthy relationship was great to see. Zooming out though, like most comfort shows, and I've already partially addressed this with the Only Murders in the Building segment, there's not a high ceiling, but the minimum quality for the show is at a very satisfying good level.
Oh, Little Black Panther. Oh.
Severance Season 2. A story following workers in a mysterious corporation who go through a procedure that splits a person's memories between work and their personal life. I have a complicated relationship with this show because I loved the first season, but the second one has some narrative rough patches that bothered me. It's definitely not a bad show, and I still have it relatively high because of how great the acting, cinematography, unique atmosphere, and production design is, along with some narrative points. But to go into some of the things that bother me, there's a lot of compounding issues that make the plot drag. Like Milchek making obvious follies that work in the plot as a function to waste time. Two examples being the season essentially having a long false start, and their field trip just doesn't make sense when you think about it. Cobell also has her own centric episode that instead should have been intercut to throughout the season, which basically puts her in limbo since she disappears after episode 3. Then, focusing on the supporting cast, everyone is disconnected and have fractured subplots. Some of them are entirely inconsequential to the main plot, like Dylan's, which is a massive contrast to season 1 where everyone felt integral. Now, Mark is the only character of importance, and his development is also dragged out, with them introducing an exciting plot thread that takes forever to blossom. This leads to an ending climax that was actually pretty satisfying, but there's still some occasional questionable writing choices. I can see a really great story under the surface here, and while some people may still love the show, I can't ignore some of its faults. It's a blend of greatness and head-scratching aspects that leave me very conflicted, and I guess I'll see how season 3 shakes out. Paradise Season 1. Didn't really hear about this show, so I went in completely blind. It's about a Secret Service agent discovering that the POTUS was killed and has to find out who did it. The first episode, because of that premise, was absorbing and had me hooked. Efficient writing, build-up, character development, it was intriguing, everything a season opener should be, and additionally, the end of the episode has a crazy twist. The rest of the season doesn't necessarily operate at this level. It's imperfect, there needs to be more depth and substance, the actual investigation portion stalls a bit and doesn't feel like it unravels that far. Sometimes there's irritating narrative tropes, and I think the final episode falls flat. With that said, Paradise contains one of the best episodes of television that single-handedly makes the entire season worth watching. Episode 7 is a masterclass in tension in societal horror. It was a terrifying roller coaster, and it's easily going to be permanently ingrained in my memory. I'd even equate this episode to the highs of Andor Season 2. However, as an overall season package, I feel the show averages out to being good. It's not the most original type of show, and the narrative arc is familiar, but of course, Sterling K. Brown and James Marsden do a great job, so there is that nice positive. The Diplomat Season 3. A show that puts a spotlight on foreign diplomacy while a sprawling conspiracy upends and sends everyone down a crazy path. That mostly describes the first 2 seasons because after Season 2, all of that mystery is mostly resolved. Season 3 primarily deals with repercussions and fallout, but since there isn't a sweeping, tense narrative pull anymore, Season 3 is naturally not as exciting. Still though, The Diplomat is an incredibly well-made show. Currently probably the best political show airing, and is a worthy successor to peak House of Cards. The writers and directors sell the realism of the setting, and he gets swept away by the competency of these complex inner machinations of how these governments run. Like, most people don't really know a lot about maintaining foreign relations, so there's a constant compelling conflict that is also very personal. Carrie Russell's character, Kate Weiler, has to deal with an incomprehensible task while navigating moral gray areas, making allies, sacrifices. Everything acts to suffocate her and put more stress on her, but that's where she flourishes. She strives in this environment, and seeing her lock in and solve deadly problems under immense pressure is always great television. Every other character is really good, and the other highlight is her husband, Hal Weiler. They have a complicated and nuanced relationship. He pushes her, challenges her, can be secretive, protective, but all of this leads to a chaotic yet intoxicating relationship. They're always fun to watch, but Season 3 doesn't see them together that much, which is another small downside. A couple other minor issues I had with the season were Kate Weiler being a bit too impulsive at times, and some interpersonal points of conflict felt a little too soapy when I wish the show was more plot focused. Season 3 isn't as tight and tense as the first 2 seasons, and I hope the writers are able to get back to that sensation for Season 4. Black Mirror Season 7. An anthology series like Twilight Zone, primarily featuring high-concept technology and dystopias. Seasons 1 through 4 are iconic, Season 5 was a flop, and I personally wasn't a fan of Season 6, so I'm glad to say that Season 7 is squarely a strong return to form, showcasing a lineup of episodes that are more consistent in terms of quality. Common People was brutal and gutting, had a very topical issue about corporations running wild with subscription services, and those infecting the medical sphere was haunting. It was predictable plot-wise, but nevertheless good. Bede Noir was a bit frustrating in terms of viewing experience, lots of gaslighting and cringe-esque moments, and this is mostly redeemed with a crazy ending twist. Hotel Reverie also has a great concept in studios using future AI software to remake movies and implanting new actors into said movies. Could be a bit better in terms of execution, but I like the creative swing and the base story. Plaything was a fun, wild ride. I personally will always love Peter Capaldi having long, crazy monologues, like from his days on Doctor Who, and this episode was oddly very captivating despite its framing device being exposition heavy. Then we have Eulogy, and this may be my favorite short from Black Mirror. It's kind of like a convention break where so many of these stories are extremely bleak and depressing, but Eulogy is a journey about going back and recollecting on your past, brought about by photogrammetry where you take a 2D photo and render a 3D setting, diving into past regrets, longing for missed opportunities and outcomes, and confronting your past in a physical way felt so therapeutic in a personal way. Paul Giamatti is a flat-out amazing actor. He carries the short and the journey, the reveals, and the twists. Absolutely loved it. And then finally we have USS Callister Into Infinity, and this is the first sequel to a Black Mirror short, and this was basically a movie. Didn't feel forced at all, and the continuation of the narrative was surprisingly exciting, and getting to have a proper resolution and more growth for everyone was satisfying. I had a pretty consistent good time with this season, and this has reinvigorated my interest in the series. The Studio Season 1. A new CEO takes the reins of a studio and tries his best to not be a colossal failure. This show gave me a major high during its first few episodes, where there were a lot of great segments, and episode 2 parodying a oneer while also being a oneer itself was genius. However, after watching all 10 episodes, the magic partially faded for me. A part of why that happened is every episode has the same structure. We start out at a normal tempo and everything slowly ramps up and gets more chaotic for obvious comedic effect. So, stripping the show down to its basic plot, every episode plays the same, and the only difference is the subject matter. To be fair, this is a good formula. It's just the repetition through every episode makes the formula lose its punch for me. This is partially subsidized with each episode making great use of its respective special guest star, but another thing that dampened the quality of the season for me was that, like most comedies, not every episode was a hit. The missing reel and the war were notably the weakest, and I also personally wasn't a fan of a couple other episodes, making it to where the show oddly peaks for me very early in the beginning and doesn't necessarily reach that high again. Besides the Golden Globes episode, that was a roller coaster throughout. Overall, comedy is the most subjective form of entertainment because everyone has their own taste of humor. So some people may love this show, while for me, I think it's definitely good. I just didn't fully enjoy all of it. Albeit, it is very well made with good directing, blocking, acting, and music. Pluribus Season 1. A hive mind that makes everyone happy takes over the world besides a few select people. The discourse surrounding Pluribus has been all over the place, and I'm not someone who's on either ends of the extremes. The good side of the show for me definitely entails its approach of storytelling. It's laid back, pulls you in, and fully engages you by not treating you as if you need a constant stream of exposition. In essence, putting a major emphasis on show don't tell and allowing some scenes to purely be driven by that mantra. Now, there is still exposition in the form of Carol asking questions to Zosha, however, that's never dull because it's always scratching that itch of mystery. There's so many mechanics in how this hive mind operates that it acts as this endless captivating trove of information. One thing that I've seen people complain about that I really like is Carol as a character. Some viewers have labeled her as being an annoying Karen, but that's inherently what she needs to be. She's one of the last bastions of humanity. Her outrage and state of mind is justified, and this gives her great agency, along with a compelling arc. So shifting over to my one negative is that the plot development feels like it drags, but primarily as a function to end the season on a specific plot point. Some examples of this are there being quite a bit of meandering, and the big mystery that Carol unravels throughout episode 5 ends up being inconsequential. To clarify, I never actively disliked anything that was happening. I even liked episode 7's crushing loneliness. It just specifically feels like the season has a definite endpoint that we have to stretch out everything else in order to get to. Regardless, I'm still excited to see what Vince Gilligan has planned because even Better Call Saul's earlier season started out slow, and that overall package was spectacular. So if Pluribus is anything like that, then we're in for a treat. Slow Horses Season 5. MI5 rejects at Slow House have to save the day from different major threats. Similar to Reacher, each season is an adaptation of a specific book from a series, and for season 5, I'd say this is just barely the weakest season, and even then, the show at its worst is still really good. And this is also coming off its best season last year, so this is fine honestly. The reason why I'd say season 5 is weaker in comparison to the others is that the main character is largely downgraded to a side character, along with his dynamic being extremely soured with everyone and not in the usual toxic fun way. Now, the upside from this is that Jackson Lamb, who's played by Gary Oldman, feels like he more or less becomes the main character, because His character is simply iconic, an extremely competent withered agent that masks that competency with a thick layer of grimy muck. Kind of like a chameleon who camouflages in his own shit, leading other characters to underestimate him, and every time he exceeds expectations, it's great. Like the end of season 5, I think is one of the best scenes from the entire show, where Jackson Lamb eviscerates someone. He's also such a funny character and has so many amazing jokes throughout essentially every season.
Look what I got to work with. A crack up, a drunk, a psychopath, and whatever the fuck that is. All of them more functional than you.
As for the plot, it's always pretty good, well-paced, intriguing, occasional moments of exciting action, a couple clever twists, and stakes that generally escalate more than you think. There's also an additional layer of conflict in which there's infighting between MI5 and Slow House, which makes the story even more fun.
So right now, we're at DEFCON shit, fuck, bollocks and scramble, and the park don't even realise it.
Slow Horses is a show I'd gladly watch for as long as it wants to run, and it also has the major benefit of coming out yearly, unlike pretty much every other show these days. Adolescence. A 4-episode miniseries that took the world by storm about a 13-year-old suddenly getting arrested. I went into the show completely blind and only knew that each episode was a single shot for the entire duration. So for that first episode when Jamie gets arrested, I was hooked. A very tense and exciting episode that is insane from a production standpoint of living through every moment of this riveting, wholesome adventure. A rare instance in which I actually think a oneer is warranted because it actually serves a strong narrative purpose, as we stay with Jamie's perspective throughout, which achieves a state in which the viewer is deeply connected to his character and his emotional journey. Now, the same can't be said for episodes 2 and 4, where I feel like the justification of using a long oneer isn't as warranted, like the cops carrying out their investigation at Jamie's school. While this is technically impressive, it doesn't have the same efficacy of the episode prior. Also, this makes me think that the show wouldn't age that well on rewatch because it is primarily about that journey. Besides episode 3 though, because I think that's easily a masterclass of an episode that I'd gladly rewatch, featuring brilliant dialogue and a devastating arc for Jamie. This is literally the episode that got him his Emmy, and it's well deserved. The fact that the writers are able to so easily keep the audience engaged for 50 minutes of dialogue is an insane feat of writing. And also acting, obviously. So many juicy points of nuance, and it all explodes in such a satisfying climax. Kinda makes it to where the next episode, which is the last one, feel a bit underwhelming in comparison, but overall, I think the miniseries is still really good. It Welcome to Derry Season 1. My expectations for this were low because I thought it would be a rehash of the original story, but it ends up offering a lot more than that. Outside of the kids facing off against Pennywise, the military subplot with the inclusion of Halloran and what he's capable of, and how he further interacts with Pennywise, is gold from a premise standpoint. Everything with him was gripping. I like how some adults are actually characters, which further introduces the horror of trying to protect your child. Like Hanlon particularly, and his lack of fear is a cool juxtaposition to Pennywise. I loved his dialogue with him in the ending, and wish we got more of Hanlon defending his child like that of a bear protecting its cub. Then, Pennywise as a villain is simply unmatched. So many cool powers that lend to a creative Mariana's Trench of horror scenes. Some of them are really effective and genuinely scared me, but one flaw for the show is that they can be rather inconsistent in quality. Like, you'll have A-tier horror scenes and then you'll suddenly get ones that belong in the D-tier. Like the cemetery scene felt as if it was straight out of Scooby-Doo, and the forest scene relies way too much on CGI. To a certain extent, you want your horror to be tactile. Relying too heavily on CG and going over the top can kind of break your trance of fear. Like the first It movie is more effective at times, where the simple premise of Pennywise staring up at you from a sewer grate is terrifying. But for Welcome to Derry, sometimes the writers lost the plot, and as an overall batting average, this wasn't a major deal. Then to quickly address some more aspects, I thought the child actors were okay to good, there's some great backstory development, the black spot was insane, and there's a specific development with Pennywise at the end. Spoilers coming up, so skip ahead to the next entry if you need to, but Pennywise being omniscient or experiencing time non-linearly is kind of the breaking point for my suspension of disbelief. Because why can't he automatically kill who he needs to whenever he wants now? Why didn't he target Marge much earlier if she's one of the ancestors of the Losers Club? There's definitely a lot of questionable aspects about this currently that could make sense later from future developments, but this kind of leads to a point where I hope Pennywise actually wins in the end and enacts some kind of crazy paradox for this world. If it keeps ending with the kids defeating Pennywise, then I feel like that drastically diminishes this legendary horror icon into being just a joke, thus making the losers defeating him not come across as a miracle because Pennywise is getting decimated in every time period now. Hacks Season 4. Don't sleep on Hacks. This is actually a really good comedy series that feels sharp and, dare I say, funny.
Do I look like a fun and flirty vacation girl?
You look like Ace Ventura, Pet Detective.
Both are sexually viable.
I feel like some comedy series barely register much out of me, but Hacks is consistently hilarious and delightful, pairing together two washed-up comedic figures who find a hidden and wonderful synergy together.
Lonely tonight? Click here, Daddy.
Oh, sorry,
What is
that's
that?
porn. Yeah, every fifth tweet is porn now. They really ruined the platform.
Deborah and Ava have such a rich and complex dynamic. I'm not exaggerating, but this is one of the most complicated character relationships in television, and their growing and ever-evolving pairing is consistently a major highlight. Given that both of them are comedic writers, it's interesting how they butt heads, there's underlying respect, vulnerable love, they understand each other deeply, they know how to push each other, how they tick, how they can be manipulative. There's just so much depth here that makes you love them. Then the supporting cast as well is lovely, and Jimmy and Kayla are a powerhouse. I've mostly been highlighting the characters, but the show from a story perspective every season really shakes up the status quo. Season 4 especially is the biggest shakeup where certain dreams our characters have had for a while are finally being realized. This creates great forward momentum where the story is always evolving. The writers aren't spinning the narrative around in a circle out of fear of creating something inferior, but they actually take risk and it consistently pays off. The end of the season is no exception, of course, and I very much will be looking forward to a 5th season. Task. A crime drama primarily told through the two perspectives of an FBI task force and the criminals they're hunting down. This was surprisingly a very refreshing series where the creators treat even the antagonist, quote-unquote, as being a protagonist. The only distinction here is that of perspective. The line very early on is blurred where these criminals are actually extremely sympathetic and good people. They're only stealing money from deadly gangs, Robbie is a father and loves his children, and he's a very noble and chill guy. These aspects deeply humanize Robbie and make you love him and want to see him succeed. There's particularly a major twist at the end of episode 1 that really sends the show in a special direction that breaks genre stereotypes and further reinforces Robbie's sympathetic nature. Then, to briefly touch on a bunch of other strengths, we're introduced to Mark Ruffalo's character, Tom, during a major complex tragedy that makes him very intriguing. All the dialogue is personal and emotional, the music sets a wonderful and euphoric vibe, the world feels dynamic in which multiple parties regularly converge in exciting ways, the supporting cast is pretty solid, my boy Kristen Cole is here, and the ending as well even moved me to tears, solidifying a great arc that Tom goes down. True Detective is in the gutter, and if you want to moderately scratch that well-written crime drama itch, then I definitely recommend Task. Invincible Season 3. You can definitely make an argument for this being the best season, standing right next to Season 1's masterpiece of a finale, and obviously what makes Season 3's ending so amazing is within basically 20 minutes of screen time, Conquest becomes engraved in the Hall of Fame of villains. I'd love to just gush about him for this whole segment, but that would inherently be too spoilery. Outside of the ending, I think this is also the most consistently strong season. Because for Invincible, there's generally a lot of side stories, and for Season 3, some of them are great, acting as their own strong self-contained stories, like Aaron Paul's episode as Powerplex. The season also comes out swinging with a stellar second episode, which could act as its own finale for other shows. And the craziest thing here is that episodes 7 and 8 are two massive climaxes. You get hit with a major wombo combo. Then for Mark, the main character, he has some great development between romance, dealing with family, the burden of protecting the world, and grappling with the moral quandary of possibly needing to kill his enemies, further submerging his psyche into a dark abyss. Everything with Mark is just wholly captivating to the point that when we aren't spending time with him, the show can kind of feel like a drag. And just saying that, people are probably judging me, but some of the subplots, like the rest of the good heroes, they're nowhere near as interesting. My only other minor grievance with the season is that Alan the alien subplot suddenly doesn't get any screen time past episode 4, which felt a little weird. Invincible to me has drastically shot past The Walking Dead for being Robert Kirkman's best work, and given its trajectory, this could go down as one of the best superhero shows out there. Dexter Resurrections. I did not believe the IMDb scores going in because no way Dexter could sustain a quality of this magnitude, and to my absolute surprise, it predominantly lived up to the hype, solidifying that this is the best season of any Dexter-oriented show, featuring a batshit insane premise that was a complete joy to sit through from start to finish, which is rare to say that even the build-up in a plotline is great. Prater, who's played by Peter Dinklage, was such a fascinating character, and I think he easily lives up to the pantheon of villains. Then, one of the most interesting aspects of Resurrections is how the show handles character work. Dexter has an incredible arc, tackling that of justice and really putting a spotlight on his inner morality to an even higher degree than before. Dexter's son pivots in an interesting direction, and at first going in, given how catastrophic of a wet flop the ending of New Blood was, I thought his character wasn't going to be addressed again, but he's great from the get-go, deeply hooking the audience with what happens to him in the beginning. Then another major surprise was Angel Batista. Legacy sequels in and of themselves are rare, and most of the time when characters come back, it's either because of fan service or they have really flimsy development. But for Batista, his story is perfect. He was the wild card of the season that really spiced everything up and pushed the show into some exhilarating directions, especially the outstanding ending. Dexter Resurrections truly kept me on my toes at times. It's kind of rare these days when movies and shows aren't painstakingly predictable, and Resurrections was a breath of fresh air. Really, my only criticism is that there were some plot conveniences here and there, but that's easily forgivable given the vast plethora of things the show does right. The Bear Season 4. To preface this, I know Season 3 was very divisive, and for me, I was fine with a more character-oriented focus, but Season 4 mostly rectifies this and strikes a better balance of still having plot progression while featuring character growth. Like, Carmi specifically really starts to spiral in an unexpected yet rational direction caused by the opening review, and that ends in a finale with the most brutal yet tender confrontation, which was oddly such an interesting moment of writing and directing. Something about The Bear feels so authentic to me. The characters feel real, and the dynamics and synergies between everyone drips with this sense of palpable energy that I don't feel in other shows. Just Richie saying something to a character in a certain way can easily make me laugh.
You like a fucking wizard?
It's unbridled chemistry between everyone, harping a sense of growth over the show and also a thematic strong point this season of family. It may be chaotic, but that sense of real confrontational energy is what brings you closer together. It's real, grounded, guttural, and emotional. How this ties in with Sydney's arc is a great revelation that really puts a spotlight on the heartwarming side of the show. I know I'm kind of going on a weird tangent here, but those are the infectious vibes of The Bear that I love and are done so well that make the show unique. Then there's, of course, your obvious great acting, directing, cinematography, editing. Pretty much everything just consistently keeps coming together to easily deliver a show that's worthy of a Michelin star. The way Season 4 ends sets up Season 5 to be a possible triumphant ending for the series, and whenever that season drops all at once, I'm binge-eating the hell out of it. The Rehearsal Season 2. This is probably a massive surprise given how high I'm placing the show, and for me, this is easily the best comedy series of 2025, despite the Emmys not even nominating it, which is wild. Now, the rehearsal has a specific style of dry, awkward, and absurdist humor that may not land with everyone, but that amalgam creates such a unique concoction of comedy. The meticulous attention to detail is so surreal, and so many encounters are gold from a premise standpoint. Nathan Fielder this season is exposing a general issue in pilot and co-pilot communication, where given their power dynamic, a co-pilot may not have the confidence to confront their superior and correct their mistakes, possibly leading to a major cause for the plane crashing, and Nathan goes all in to prove this and bring awareness to it, bringing forth his methodical and crazy rehearsal model. This may not sound that interesting, but Nathan does offer a lot of interesting moral conundrums while impressively still maintaining the show as being very comedic. Like the Evanescence punchline in episode 3 is no joke, the hardest I laughed at something in probably like ever, but it requires an entire episode of build-up to properly explain. However, to point to an example of a clever visual joke that opens the season is during a plane crash simulation, Nathan is standing amidst the fire, creating this daunting silhouetted figure. Right away, not only is this a creative gag, but it perfectly bundles this brand of humor in an easily consumable visual metaphor. Then past this, you apply this level of precision throughout the whole season, and even that is scratching the surface because the finale goes in such an unthinkably insane direction that just makes Nathan Fielder the most committed creative in the industry, all while maintaining a level of nuance where Nathan himself has a background character arc, blurring the line of what's actually real. This is the epitome of out-of-the-box creative storytelling. The Pitt Season 1. This and the next show are easily 10 out of 10s, and it was pretty close for who took the top spot. For The Pitt though, I can't stop recommending the show to the point that I'm driving my Discord crazy. The entire season is one shift, and each episode is an hour of that shift. Stylistically, it's very similar to The Bear's frenetic energy, and this is by no means your usual soap opera medical drama. It's always extremely tense, the writing is deceptively brilliant, the creators juggle so many running plot threads, which is extremely impressive and further adds to the stacking tension, and then from a logistics point of view, all of this interweaving in one dynamic set is a masterpiece from a directing standpoint. This may seem like glowing highlights so far, but we're merely grazing the surface. Firstly, the main standout best piece of the show is Robbie. Noah Wile's performance absolutely swept the awards for a reason because he imbues an immeasurable sense of empathy and turmoil at all times. He's the beating heart of the ER. Secondly, at certain points, the show will make you cry and not let go of you. Episode 9 particularly revolving around trying to resuscitate a drowned child is just woof. It's a lot, and the way they keep escalating the emotions, like with the kid's sister, was brutal. Then the one last crispy highlight is that the climax is flat out crazy. Once it starts, you're going on a wild ride and you feel the adrenaline in every micro moment, almost to a point where it feels like time flies by as you're riding a major high. I'm very much glazing The Pitt, and it definitely deserves it. And also a big bonus is that season 2 is basically already out. The Pitt won Best Drama for a reason, but I'd personally give the very slight edge to the next show, which is Andor Season 2. The reason why Andor edges out The Pitt for me is that, from a story perspective, the last half of Season 2 consistently hits at such an insanely high bar that it kind of ascends into its own tier, becoming something that Star Wars will never be able to achieve again. It's a momentous achievement that also feels like it's timed perfectly for what this world needed. Not only do we get the harrowing and exhilarating Gorman massacre, but the show keeps topping itself from there. Mon Mothma's speech and extraction is nail-biting throughout, Luthen gets a triumphant end with an entire backstory episode for him, which is just spectacular. He's my favorite character, of course. Clea even gets much-needed development, and the hospital heist was great. And Cassian coming in at the end and subverting the Empire, cracking down all around them to get the vital information out about the Death Star was just the perfect last cherry on top. Any of these individual plot points would make a great climax for any other show, but the fact that we get all of them strung together creates a euphoric kebab of television. I haven't felt this transfixed on an episode-to-episode basis since the last season of Better Call Saul. I know the first half of the season may be packed with a lot of buildup, but the second half obviously makes up for it. Then for Cassian, even though this isn't technically his ending, Tony Gilroy achieves a perfect and satisfying arc for his character, almost making it feel like a spiritual ending for his journey through the show. It's honestly really sad that Rogue One doesn't come close to Andor's quality, because if that movie was this show's season 3, then that may have been the best television event of the decade. Disney needs to stop remaking its animated films into live action and do that instead, please. Andor represents that with mature and grounded storytelling, this franchise can have far greater potential. There we have it, all 40 of the most popular shows this year ranked. To clarify, this isn't my personal ranking of the best shows this year, because I'm specifically trying to seek out the most popular shows. Next year I might do that instead, but regardless, thank you so much for getting to the end. Let me know in the comments what your favorite or most hated shows are, and my Letterboxd, Discord, and Patreon links are in the description. Thanks to my consistent and supportive top patron, Logan Farmer.